Okay, so this is the slide we just left off on. Let's go on to the next. So the hypothalamus is the main visceral control and regulating center that is vital to homeostasis. The hypothalamus is actually, it's like the master gland that, has control over the pituitary gland, which then goes and produces single-handedly most, if not, most all of the tropic hormones in your body. Tropic hormone, if you recall, is a hormone that is in charge of producing another hormone. Okay, let's make sure that it all fits on your slide. Show. Okay. So it initiates, so controls the nervous system actually with homeostasis control. Controls the autonomic nervous system. When we talk about it, it's part of, so autonomic nervous system can be further divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic, right? So examples of autonomic nervous system control that is controlled by the hypothalamus is blood pressure, heart rate and force of the heartbeat, digestive tract motility, and pupil size. And it initiates physical responses to emotions. So the hypothalamus is actually a part of the limbic system, and it perceives pleasure, anger, rage, biological rhythms, and drives, like sex drives. So the the hypothalamus, as far as the limbic system is concerned, is in charge of what they call the drives, or the 4 Fs. It is fight, flight, food, and sex. Those are your 4 Fs. We have to keep it PG, people. Okay. Let's go on to the next slide. The hypothalamus also regulates body temperature, like as in sweating and shivering, regulates hunger and satiety in response to nutrient blood levels or hormones, regulates water balance and thirst, regulates in sleep-wake cycles, and the just so you know, the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the thalamus sets our biological clock. That particular factoid, super important. Please, please, please remember that. The suprachiasmatic nucleus of the thalamus sets our biological clock. Controls endocrine system functions such as secretion of the anterior pituitary gland and production of the posterior pituitary hormones. Let's go ahead and... Nope. Put a star next to that, please. This one and this one. Okay. Epithalamus is the most dorsal portion of the diencephalon. It forms the roof of the third ventricle, and it contains the pineal gland. This pineal gland actually secretes melatonin that helps regulates the sleep-wake cycle. What's interesting is that in ancient civilizations, the pineal gland has been linked to the connection to the divine. It's interesting. This picture, if it appears any more, let me tell you, any more. Which then brings us to the brainstem. The brainstem consists of 3 regions. So this is from superior to inferior, midbrain, pons, and medulla. And I have to tell you, we just need to know the location, superior to inferiorly. I mean, you know me. By now, I like asking questions like, please list the parts of the brain stem from superior to inferior, right? Totally. And that would be worth like 3 points. And then if I said, and state a function, the number of points in that particular question goes up to 6. That's a lot for a 50-question test. So it's similar in structure to the spinal cord, but contains nuclei embedded in the white matter. Controls automatic behaviors necessary for survival, and it contains fiber tracts connecting higher and lower neural centers. Nuclei are associated with 10 of the 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Okay, so cranial nerves is going to be one. I'm going to post a separate one tutorial on that later. Midbrain. Midbrain's located in the between the diencephalon and the pons. The cerebral peduncles, it's interesting. They're two like ventral bulges, and they actually contain the parameter motor tracts. They form pillars that hold up the cerebrum. The cerebral aqueduct is a channel running through the midbrain that connects the third and fourth ventricles. So of those two, I'm less concerned with the peduncles, much more concerned with the aqueduct. Periaqueductal gray matter is the nuclei that play a role in pain suppression in the fight or flight response. This is also important because of how relevant this is to everyone's daily life. Also include the nuclei that controls cranial nerve 3, which is oculomotor, and 4, which is trochlear. What that will mean much more to you once we do, once we actually get into the cranial nerves. Which brings us to the pons. The pons is located between the midbrain and the medulla. If you look at that picture, where is that picture? Aha. So I'm going to point to you here. So the midbrain is right here. Okay. And then the pons is right here. And then the medulla is that bulge right there. So I don't know why this makes me think of like a seahorse. You know how the seahorse has a belly? So the pons I actually associate with the belly of the seahorse. I know that may not look like a seahorse to anyone else that's looking or listening to this. Hey, whatever works for you, make it work for yourself. The fourth ventricle separates the pons from the cerebellum. It's composed of conduction tracts. So the longitudinal fibers connect the higher brain centers to the spinal cord, and the transversal, or the sideways, the dorsal fibers relay impulses between the motor cortex and the cerebellum. That makes sense, right? The motor cortex has to do with movement, and the cerebellum has to do with coordinated movements and balance. Also, the pons is the origin of cranial nerves 5, 6, and 7. Please remember that. Some nuclei play a role in the reticular formation, and some help maintain normal breathing, rhythm of breathing. Medulla oblongata. I know you guys are probably giggling about the movie reference. It's just also known as simply the medulla. It blends into the spinal cord at the foramen magnum, and it contains within it the fourth ventricle. This is the continuation of the central canal of the spinal cord. The fourth ventricle is. Medulla and the pons form the ventral wall. It contains the choroid plexus. The choroid plexus is a capillary-rich membrane that forms spinal fluid. So the choroid plexus is where new cerebral spinal fluid is formed. Something to remember is that the amount in a healthy human, barring that nothing's wrong, the amount that's produced and the amount that goes away is the same, so that the pressure is actually kept pretty consistent. Structures of the medulla are going to be the pyramids. There's two ventral longitudinal ridges formed by the pyramidal tracts. Then you have the decussation of the pyramids, which is the point where the pyramidal tracts cross over to the opposite side of the body. Then the olives are swellings caused by the olivary nuclei that relay stretch information from the muscles and joints to the cerebellum. So cranial nerves 8, 9, 10, and 12 originate from here. Vestibular and cochlear nuclei mediate responses that maintain equilibrium, so it's constantly communicating. Nucleus cutaneous and nucleus gracilis relay ascending sensory information from the spinal cord. So again, of this information, I really do like the choroid plexus piece. And the origin of the different cranial nerves pieces. Functions of the medulla oblongata, which I really want to stress. It's the autonomic reflex center. Many functions overlap with the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus relays instructions via the medulla. Functional groups of the medulla include, this is important, the heart center, the cardiac center, and the vasomotor center. So the cardiac center adjusts the force and the rate of the heart contraction, and the vasomotor center adjusts the blood vessel diameter so that you can get pressure regulation. Also, it contains the respiratory centers that generates respiratory rhythm, and it controls the rate and the depth in conjunction with the pontine centers. Various other centers: hiccuping, vomiting, swallowing, coughing, sneezing. A lot of your reflexes are going to be controlled there. Okay, so we have next the cerebellum. Cerebellum is a smaller version of the cerebrum, right? It makes up 11% of the brain mass, and it's located dorsally to the pons and the medulla. The processes input from the cortex, brainstem, and sensory receptors to provide precise coordinated movements of skeletal muscles. This is crucial, people. Please, if you can put a star by it, by golly, I'm gonna do that right now. I do that right now. Oh no, insert. Oh, this is not doing anything right now. Okay, never mind. I'm not doing it then. Please put a star by that. So, considering cerebellar anatomy, the Purkinje fibers originate in the cortex, the synapse with the cerebellum. So what's interesting about the cerebellar homunculus shows sensory maps of the entire body. With the cerebellum, you all, I just want to be clear, it fine-tunes motor activity in this way. It receives impulses from cerebral cortex of intent to initiate voluntary muscle. So, the cerebral cortex goes, hey, I'm about to move something, or I'm about to move my finger. Let's talk about that. Then it receives signals from proprioceptors. Proprioceptors are internal receptors of self. So throughout the body, as well as visual and equilibrium pathways that continuously inform the cerebellum of body's position and momentum, meaning, hey, we're over here, we're over here now, we're over here now. So you are constantly aware of where you are in your own body. The cerebellar cortex calculates the best way to smoothly coordinate the muscle contraction, and it sends the blueprint of coordinated movement of cerebral motor cortex and brainstem nuclei, and then you get finger movement. Cognitive functions of the cerebellum. Neuroimaging suggests that cerebellum plays a role in thinking, language, and emotion as it does for motor processes. It may compare actual output of higher functions with expected output and adjust accordingly. So it is now our running understanding that the cerebellum may actually be like a regulator, meaning if we are, when the cerebrum is the one that actually gives you the grunt of like a pure, unrefined emotion even, that the cerebellum is what fine-tunes it, just like it's been doing for movement. Yep. Functional brain systems, we've got limbic system and the reticular formation, networks of neurons that work together, which is, but span wide areas. It's very diffusely spread across in the brain. The limbic system is fascinating, people. Structures on the medial aspects of the cerebral hemispheres and the diencephalon. The fornix is the fiber tract that links the limbic system regions. It includes parts of the diencephalon, some of the cerebral structures, and that encircle the brain. It also encircles the brainstem. This one, the limbic system, is a large part of the emotional or affective brain. The amygdaloid body recognizes angry or fearful facial expressions, assesses danger, and elicits fear response. So the amygdaloid body is going to be the stranger danger piece. And it's fear-based. The cingulate gyrus then plays a role in expressing emotions via gestures and resolves mental conflict. So whenever, I don't know if you've noticed this about the human body, it's that if there's an on switch, there's always an off switch. So the amygdaloid body is going to be like fearful face expressions, assess the danger, and get the fear response going. The cingulate gyrus is it resolves mental conflict. It puts emotional responses to odors as well, like skunks smell bad, like you have an opinion about it. You smell cookies and you think of your grandma. I mean, I didn't have that, but maybe y'all do. Most output is relayed via the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus plays a role in the psychosomatic illnesses. Interesting, right? So to me, when people say psychosomatic, they're like, oh, it's bad, they're faking it. Actually, it's not. It actually shows a very powerful brain, and it shows how much what your thoughts can do as far as healing and hurting your body. Limbic system interacts with prefrontal lobes. It allows us to react emotionally to things we consciously understand to be happening. Makes us consciously aware of emotional richness in our lives. Things make us happy. We put meaning to things. Hippocampus and the amygdaloid body also play a role in memory. Look at these, because it's like quick brain. What part? And the function. Higher mental functions. Analysis of higher mental functions include language, memory, brain waves and EEGs, consciousness, sleep, and sleep-wake cycles. Language. Language implementation system involves association cortex of the left hemisphere. Main areas we're going to talk about is the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area. We talked about this, where Broca's area is involved in speech production. So your muscles, it has to do with muscle formation. Okay. Wernicke's area has to do with understanding spoken or written words. So just as an example, going back to what we talked about, Broca's area, if there's a lesion in Broca's area, you're going to get broken speech. You're going to sound like the Tasmanian devil because you can't move and coordinate the muscles of speech enough. Then you have the Wernicke's area that has to do with if there's what do you call it? If there's damage there or a lesion there, you're going to get word salad. So you can say the words, but they don't make any sense. So corresponding areas on the right side are involved then with nonverbal language components. Memory is a storage and retrieval of information that you have. There's different kinds. Okay, another thing. So four types that we need to know about. Four types we need to know about: declarative memory, procedural memory, motor memory, and emotional memory. Doesn't this sound like a potential test question? Okay, going back. So, different kinds of memory. Please list 4 different kinds of memory. And explain what they are. Declarative means memory of facts, names, faces, words, and dates. Procedural is a memory of skills, like playing the piano, right? Or other instruments. Motor memory is it's a memory of motor skills, like riding a bike. Emotional memory of experiences linked to an emotion, like hearts pounding when you hear a rattlesnake. That's a big fearful response. Brainwave patterns in the EEG. What I need for you to really be mindful of is what the EEG stands for and what it does, which is an electroencephalogram, or an EEG, records electrical activity that accompanies brain function. Used for diagnosing epilepsy, sleep disorders, localized lesions, tumors, infarcts, infections, abscesses, and it's used in research a lot and also to determine whether you are brain dead. Electrodes are placed on the scalp to measure electrical potential differences between various cortical areas. Yep, and that's what that looks like. So, a couple things with brain waves. The big thing about this one, I just need you to know that each person's brainwaves are really unique, and they can be grouped into 4 classes based on hertz, which is a frequency, right? 1 hertz is 1 peak per second. So there are alpha, beta, theta, and delta waves. I don't need you to know the numbers, but alpha waves are 8 to 13 hertz. This is regular and rhythmic. Low amplitude, these are synchronous waves indicating an idling brain. So it's just on idle, this is the car that's just kind of running. Beta waves are 14 to 30. These are rhythmic, less regular waves occurring when mentally alert. So when you are alert, you're on the beta waves. Theta is more irregular, common in children and uncommon in awake adults. Delta waves, which is 4 hertz or less, high amplitude waves of deep sleep, and when reticular activating system is suppressed, as during anesthesia, indicates brain damage in an awake adult. So delta waves indicate brain damage in an adult that's awake. So consciousness involves perception of sensation, voluntary initiation and control of movement, and capabilities associated with higher mental processing like memory and logic and judgment. Hello. Consciousness. 3 different components of that involves consciousness. Perception of sensation, voluntary initiation and control of movement, capabilities associated with higher mental processing like memory, logic, and judgment. Clinically defined on the continuum that grades behavior in response to stimuli: alertness, drowsiness, stupor, and coma. That is from alert down to in decreasing levels of consciousness. Current suppositions of consciousness. It involves simultaneous activity of large cortical areas. It's superimposed on other neural activities. And it's holistic and totally interconnected, which doesn't really sound like we know too much about it. Okay, and let's pause there so that you all can take a break.